So welcome, Samuel, and it is really my honor to introduce Samuel Fardow, if I pronounced that right, Kazen, at this 20th annual conference of the American Monetary Institute. As you may know from the website, Samuel chairs the Association for Digital Democracy and works for Positiva Pengar, which is the monetary reform organization in Sweden. Samuel has a master's degree in practical philosophy and has studied cognitive science, psychology, statistics, philosophy, political science, and anthropology as well, all crucial for understanding money, frankly. Samuel frequently presents on pedagogy, democracy, bullying, religion, politics, monetary systems, community building, fundraising, and he recently authored a report about the monetary system for the Swedish think tank, Catalyst. And it is through his work with Positiva Pengar, which, like the Alliance for Just Money in the US, is an organizational member of the International Movement for Monetary Reform. And it's through his work with Positiva Pengar that I and many of us in AMI and AFGM came to know Samuel. Samuel has been instrumental in organizing numerous webinars over the past few years with leading scholars of monetary critique and reform work, and in collaborating with members of other IMMR organizations to pull off those events in well-organized, delivered, and attended ways. And these included webinars with Michael Kumhoff, a longtime researcher at the Bank of England, who has also presented many times at AMI, webinar with Joseph Huber, a retired professor of sociology of economy and ecology, also a frequent presenter at AMI. And that presentation was on Huber's new book on the monetary turning point and the key design principles of CBDC if it's going to achieve sovereign money. And also with Peter Deitch, a professor of philosophy in Canada who works on economic ethics, monetary dimensions of it included, and also the former governor of the Riksbank, the central bank in Sweden, Stefan Ingves, who was there from 2006 to 2022. And that's a webinar in English we still hope to have. The first one was in Swedish. And then most recently with the banker Jonathan McMillan, who just gave a very similar presentation here today. And while many others in IMMR were involved in the success of those webinars, without Samuel's leadership and steadfast work on the details, they could not have happened. And so Samuel is, in short, a super organizer, collaborator, and he gets things done. And Samuel did all this while becoming, with his spouse, a new parent of a son who I think by now is almost 1 year old. So in short, Samuel is a wonderful monetary reformer, a lovely, hardworking person. And he is here with us now to talk with us about the governance, means, and ends of the ideal central bank. So thank you for your work, Samuel, for being who you are, and for sharing with us today. And I will pass the microphone on to you. So thanks.
Wow, this was really a presentation. Thank you so much for this and for inviting me to this conference. I'm very happy to be here and see that so many people here today. I will just jump straight forward into my presentation, and I will see if the sound is working well. You can hear me? Yes?
Yes,
good.
Everything's good.
And the screen sharing, it seems to be inactivated. So we'll try to see. You may have to make me into co-host for it.
Yeah, I'm going to put you back, and then I'm going to do that right now.
You already have the ability to share, Sam.
Okay.
So now it seems to work. And you can see my presentation here. Hopefully, I will just adjust this little panel here. So, okay, McMillan in his presentation, he focused on how to reform the financial system, or even how to reform the corporate form or capitalism itself. But in this presentation, I will start from a slightly different angle. I will focus more on central banks, about the governance, means, and ends of the idle central bank. So many commentators, they agree that central banks, they are facing a crisis of political legitimacy. However, the diagnosis and remedies, they differ when it comes to the governance, the objectives, and the tools of the central banks. So some argue that the problem today is that central bank independence is threatened. We have to safeguard central bank independence. Others, they argue, no, central banks, they are too independent. We have to democratize them. That's the thing we should go for. So others, they argue that no, monetary policy, it should focus only on a strict inflation target and not focus on anything else. So that's what McMillan proposed in the end of their book from 2014 and 2024 when it comes to monetary policy. And others, they argue, oh, central banks, they should focus on inequality, on employment, on environmental things, etc., etc. Some, they argue that when it comes to the tools, that the main problem is that the central bank's toolbox is too wide. It should be narrowed down to avoid abuse. Others, they argue, no, the central bank's toolbox, it's too narrow. They need more efficient tools and wider tools and more tools to actually be able to reach their targets. So my starting question for this is, so why are the diagnosis and remedies so scattered and contradictory? So I understand the current legitimacy crisis as a problem of misalignment between the central bank's position along these three scales. So look at this central bank, for instance. So what is the problem with this central bank? So if you have a strongly independent central bank here on the scale, and you give them a very broad mandate, and you give them a very broad toolbox, then you delegate huge amount of power to unelected officials. And I would say that this is a bad idea in a democratic state. This amount of power, I mean, it's not aligned with this poor level of democratic influence over the central bank. So another problem here is the mismatch between the tools here and the objectives. It has to use a very limited toolbox to do a lot of things. I mean, it can barely achieve. It has too broad objectives here. And this can lead to negative side effects such as increased inequality, financial instability, etc., etc. So I believe that a necessary condition for a central bank to have high political legitimacy is that the central bank's position along these three scales are consistently aligned. And this, I think, explains why opinions in the debate differ so much. I mean, different commentators, they just want to reach a state of alignment between the scales through changing different parameters here. So, okay, which proposal should we go for then? Along which of these scales should we try to reform a central bank to reach legitimacy, to reach political legitimacy? To determine that, I think we have to start from the basic and define, okay, what is a central bank? And this may, of course, be trivial for many of you here that know this, but it can still be philosophically interesting just to clarify the definition a little bit. So I define a central bank as a public institution that is responsible for implementing the state's monetary policy. Then I define a monetary policy as the state's policy for how money should be created, circulated, and destroyed within the state's jurisdiction. Just to clarify this circulated poem. So with circulation, I mean how the payment system for circulation of money works. So not how money should be allocated in the economy, because this is fiscal policy, not monetary policy. And I can also give you two examples of monetary policies here. So, for example, you can go for a libertarian monetary policy where the state never interfere. You only use private monies. Or you can go for a socialist monetary policy where the state creates all money and all kind of private monies are prohibited. And you can have various hybrid positions between this, with state money and private monies and a different combination between them. And then I define monetary policy tools as some kind of technology or instruments that the state used to conduct its monetary policy. So what are the possible monetary policy tools then? So, I mean, first, provide a payment infrastructure and define some kind of transaction rules. For example, I mean, today the central bank provides a payment infrastructure only for the few big banks. Then the central bank also needs some tool for long-term permanent addition or withdrawal of money. Here we have, for instance, helicopter money is such a tool, or you can have a liquidity fee. It's also such a tool to issue money without loans and without anyone having to go into debt. And today, these kind of tools is not used at all. And then third, we have flexible addition and withdrawal of money. For example, a central bank can buy or sell assets or lend or borrow money. And these are the kind of tools that are used today. And one interesting feature about this is transactions are reversed. Yeah? So when you sell assets or when money is repaid, when a loan is repaid, I mean, this it's not a permanent expansion of the money supply. It's just a temporary expansion here when you use these kind of tools. So this is what I think a central bank can do. And this also sets some limits, some first limits for what the central bank should do. And the central bank cannot solve all types of problems. So some problems in the economy depends on real resources, on human behavior, on other things. And they cannot be fixed by monetary policy tools. And I think this speaks in favor of not giving the central bank too broad objectives. You cannot give them objectives to do things that's impossible to achieve with monetary policy tools. So are there more limits then for what the central bank should do? And to investigate that, let's start with the arguments and just investigating all interesting and relevant arguments in the debate. We will go through them very, very fast. I mean, it's impossible to in one presentation go into depth into everything, but I will try to summarize what I think is the most important arguments in the debates. So we'll start with arguments for the current central bank paradigm. And here we start with this. High and unstable inflation is bad. So after the high inflation in the 70s and 80s, a new consensus was formed that inflation is always something bad. Inflation was also thought to be mainly a monetary thing, and hence, I mean, central banks were given the main objective to fight inflation. The second argument for the current paradigm is that monetary policy involves no political controversial trade-offs. So before, many believed in the Phillips curve, that there was a trade-off between high inflation and high unemployment. But new arguments developed that the Phillips curve only held in the short run. And this implied that an expansive monetary policy can achieve nothing good in the long run, but just inflation. So this argument, it was used to argue that it's uncontroversial to give a lot of power to central banks. Central banks cannot affect the real economy, but they can do it in a substantial way. They never face any political controversial trade-offs when they make decisions, so therefore, yeah, no problem to give them a lot of power. So, the third argument, monetary control will tempt politicians to run time-inconsistent policies. So if politicians were given full control over money creation, there is a risk that short-term motives to spend a lot before an election or to temporarily create new jobs, etc., this will conflict with long-term motives, such as maintaining a stable value of money. And this argument, it speaks in favor of highly independent central banks that can make unpopular but necessary decisions to keep the inflation stable in the long run. Then a fourth argument here is that control over the money supply will tempt politicians to use an inflation tax. So the idea here is that a politician with control over monetary policy will face the choice, okay, should I finance this reform through higher taxes? Or maybe through money creation and inflation. And it may be more difficult to convince the people to accept higher taxes and just an easier road to just print money behind everyone's back. But that would be dishonest. So therefore, politicians should not have control over money creation. Then, fifth argument here is that ordinary taxes, it's a more fine-grained tool than an inflation tax. So then it's just better to force politicians to finance reforms through taxes than inflation and money creation. And then we have a last argument I will bring up, and this is the needs for efficient checks and balances in the state, the separation of powers. The separation of powers between the legislative, the executive, and the judicial power. And this idea, it has roots back to medieval times when the king could arbitrarily just raise the taxes when he needed more money. And to safeguard the people, a new order was founded where the king, the executive power, had to ask for the parliament's approval, to ask the legislative power for approval to be able to raise the taxes. So this separation of powers, it will be undermined if the government were allowed to bypass the parliament and just print money as a substitute for legalized taxation, is the argument here. So together, all these arguments, they strongly point towards two conclusions. So money creation should not be controlled directly by the government, and low and stable inflation should be the overarching target for monetary policy. So the solution that the world went for then was, to delegate monetary policy to independent central banks. So now over to some challenges to this paradigm that we have today. A lot has happened since this new central bank regime was adapted all over the world. So first, post-Keynesian research questioned the assumption that monetary policy really is neutral in the long run. They criticized central banks for creating unemployment and argued that a more expansive monetary policy could permanently lower unemployment rate without creating inflation. For a long time, when it comes to this problem of timing inconsistency, for a long time, I would say that it has been a reversed problem of time inconsistency. Politicians, they have competed in proving themselves faithful to austerity policy and to spend as little as possible. And this has forced the central banks to compensate through a very expansive monetary policy. However, the central bank's tools for conducting an expansionary policy, they were not efficient. The lower interest rates didn't work. When there were no demands for new loans, they cannot work. So the central banks, they thus had to invent new tools such as negative interest rates and purchasing assets. And these tools were not only inefficient, but they had serious side effects such as pumping up the prices of financial assets and real estates, thus increasing the risk for price bubbles and financial crisis and increasing economical inequality. Moreover, when a central bank buys assets, a side effect of the transaction is that an intermediary bank also receives money on the central bank account. And after extensive asset purchase programs, the banks now have huge amount of money that earns them interest, and this just free money into the bankers' pockets. The asset purchase programs, they have also been criticized for exposing the central bank's balance sheets to risky assets, thus gambling with the taxpayers' money. And also, as a way to prove that central banks, they are actually willing to act as market makers of last resort and take on the risk of the whole financial sector into their balance sheets. The value of all kinds of financial assets now seems to be more or less guaranteed by the state. And then there are several other problems. I will not go into everything in detail here because, I mean, you know all the problems. Bank regulation failed due to digital development, like McMillan talked about. Monetary policy is not market neutral. It's affecting some companies more than others. Central bank block innovation through keeping the old bank money technology, it's keeping that alive through all the subsidies, and fintech companies cannot flourish as they should have been able otherwise. More power to central banks, but no democratic accountability, etc., etc. So, okay. So, what is an optimal central bank then? So now we have all the important arguments here as a background. So now we can ask this question: what is an optimal central bank? What should the governance, means, and the ends be of an ideal central bank? And then, to answer this question, I will just start here with some requirements that I think an optimal proposal should fulfill. So here we have, I have 3 such requirements then. So the first is that the governance, means, and ends should be consistently aligned here, as I talked about in the beginning. So second, the proposal should be consistent with the strong arguments for the current central bank paradigm that still holds. So as I would say, so some of these arguments are undermined. I mean, this argument is clearly undermined, but many of these arguments, they actually still holds, at least to some degree, I would say. They're not bad arguments. So it would be nice if the proposal is consistent with as many of these arguments as possible. And it should also solve as many of the challenges for the current paradigm as possible. And it is these challenges that it should solve as many of these challenges as possible. So these are my requirements then for a proposal to be a really good proposal. So now the methodology. So how should we then go forward now to investigate this question? What should we do? So we can just work systematically. We can just start with a proposal that is most to the left here on these 3 scales. And then we can investigate it, and then we can say, okay, this proposal, can we find any substantial problems with it? Do we need to improve it? And then we can move to the right and see and look at another proposal and see, okay, is this a better proposal? And is this? So this is my methodology here. So let's then start with this investigation. Yeah, sorry. And I will start with a proposal that's then most to the left on all these 3 scales, which means super strong central bank independence. The central bank focus only on a strict price stability goal and nothing else, and we give as few tools as possible to the central bank that cannot be abused at all. And this is actually McMillan's proposal for monetary policy, I would say. So when it's come then to payment infrastructure, they propose a public payment infrastructure provided by the state. When it comes to long-term tools for adding and withdrawing money, they propose helicopter money to the citizens and a liquidity fee to withdraw money. And when it comes to more flexible tools, so they have no proposals for this. They say everything else should be prohibited for the central bank. Only these tools alone. So, yeah, and I illustrate their proposal here also. We have a strongly independent central bank, new money directly to the citizens, and they take back money through a liquidity fee. So, the benefits of this proposal, no privileged access to central bank money for big banks. Everyone will have equal access to central bank money, and banks have to finance the lending through borrowing money. No moral hazard, so insolvent banks can possibly now default. The state now provides a stable payment infrastructure, so the banks are not systemically important anymore. However, according to McMillan, I mean, this requires a systemic solvency rule to achieve this. This is a background to be able to implement this new policy. But I will not discuss the systemic solvency rule in this presentation because too little time. And third, no need for complicated liquidity capital rules to prevent moral hazard, more efficient control over inflation than today, without all the side effects we have today. Central bankers cannot abuse their powers. I mean, the worst thing the central bank can do in this system is to issue too little money to all the citizens, or too much money, so we got inflation. But it's quite easy to evaluate this and to keep them accountable for this. So. Transparency and understandability. So this argument should not be underestimated, because the current system we have today with two parallel circulations of money, it's very complex. It's counterintuitive. It's impossible to understand for ordinary people. And I would say this is not democratic, and this is much more easier to understand. And seventh, then, the government can only get newly created money through an income tax on helicopter drops here. So this forces the government to work hard to earn the citizens' trust and to use the money in a responsible way. So I would say that overall, this proposal then scores very high when it comes to the arguments on the previous slides. So isn't this the optimal proposal then? Shouldn't we go for McMillan's proposal for monetary policy? What do you say? Seems like the best one. Maybe. There are also some objections here. So I will just go through the main objections. So first, a too narrow focus on only inflation as the main target, it can have bad consequences for the economy. So for example, I mean, if the inflation, if it's due to external shocks, pandemics, and factors like this, then the central bank should not always compensate for inflation immediately. Then it might be better to let the inflation in the short run deviate from the target. And in the meanwhile, let politicians focus on solving the actual underlying problems, non-monetary problems that are creating this temporary increase in inflation. So this is first problem. And a second objection is, okay, the proposal will entail a deficit of money and higher interest rates. So the idea here is, so if you limit the bank's funding to the already existing savings, this would lead to a shortage of money and higher interest rates. So I would say about this argument that, okay, there is something to this argument, but it's not a good argument actually. Because first, so today, everyone has to pay interest rate to private banks for all the existing money in the economy. McMillan's proposal, it would mean that the whole money supply is issued without debt, or at least the public part of the money supply is issued without debt. And that would strongly reduce the amount of interest we have to pay to the banks. This is the first flaw with this objection then. Again, so second, there will be no general shortage of money because the central bank can just issue new money to the people to increase the loanable funds, which would decrease the interest rate and increase the inflation. So third, if the interest rates increase anyway, so why I would say this is just something good. Well, why it's something good with higher interest rate then? So it implies lower asset prices, which increase the financial stability, and it also makes it cheaper to buy a home for ordinary people. And second, so higher general interest rates. This just means that the state has stopped to automatically subsidize whatever the banks want to finance. And this is important. I mean, here is a short story just to describe the current system we have today. I mean, so suppose that the market doesn't believe in gold digging expeditions, and they doesn't believe in companies that profit on cutting down the rainforest and such thing, because the market thinks that this is too risky and it's not worth the return to invest in this. So thus the interest rates will now become very high when gold digging expeditions and illegal rainforest companies, when they want to borrow money, the interest rates will be high. So the fact that the market-based interest rate now is high for this, it's however not a good reason for the state to just automatically subsidize these businesses through pushing down the general interest rates everywhere. So what the state does today, I mean, it can be compared with actively pouring huge amount of money into all kinds of businesses, including really bad and risky businesses. And this is why McMillan say that the current system will, I mean, undermine prosperity in the long run, because we are actively subsidizing risky and bad industries and businesses that would not survive on the market on their own. So McMillan's proposal, it might lead to higher general interest rates. But this is not something bad. It's just to stop to automatically subsidizing whatever the banks wants to finance. I mean, a much better policy, it would be to make active political decisions about which projects that should be subsidized by the public. Then the state could with a much higher precision just push down interest rates for projects that will benefit us all. So just to conclude about this objection about deficit of money and high interest rate, it's actually a bad objection, I would say. But I said also that it's something into this argument, and it's because there is a better version of this argument. And the better version is that the existing savings and the helicopter drops, they may not be enough for really large-scale investments that we need to do, for example, to make a transition to a sustainable economy, a large green transition or something like that. If we want to do this fast, then it may be difficult to finance it through only the helicopter drops and through the existing savings. And this, I think, is a valid counter-argument against McMillan's monetary policy proposal. And then a fourth argument, a fourth objection here. And this is a risk of fluctuating interest rates. Macmillan's proposal is based on a strong belief in the efficiency and rationality of free markets. So in an efficient market, the balance between supply and demand for money, it would keep the interest rates stable. However, I'm not fully as optimistic. They might be right, but I'm not fully as optimistic. So in reality, I think people are often, they can be lazy, irrational, they can just skip to change bank to optimize their interest rates. And people also have a tendency towards herd behavior. So in bad times, it can be the case that everyone might want to save their money on a CBDC account, which means that this money, it's not invested at all. And then in the optimistic times, people might take much more risk and everyone just wants to invest. And I mean, in these cases, the interest rate would go up and down very much. So in these cases, the problem is not that the money supply is too large or that the money supply is too small. So the problem, I would say, is this. Macmillan's monetary policy proposal lacks this third category. It lacks the flexible tools for withdrawing and issuing new money temporarily to compensate for market failures, etc., that leads to fluctuating in interest rates. So this is what I think we need to add to solve the problems here with Macmillan's policy proposal. So let's then discuss how we can solve the problem. Okay, how long have I been talking? Just so I don't. You may also be exhausted from previous presentation. I mean,
Oh, you're doing good, Sam.
Yeah, you got 20 minutes at least.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Then I can finish it in like
We'll
10
move,
minutes.
Sir Hummel, maybe give him, change him up only 5 minutes to it or something, or
Yeah,
it may work out. But keep going. You got,
yeah,
this is wonderful. Thank you.
I continue. So, okay, here we start with Macmillan's model. So price stability is the overarching goal, and helicopter money and the liquidity fee as the main tools. So I have illustrated it in this picture. So we start from this, and now the question is, can we improve their proposal through moving to the right on these three scales of governance and objectives and tools? A minimal expansion of the central bank's mandate could be to propose a secondary objective, a subordinated to the main objective. So this would allow the central bank to take into account what is happening more broadly in the economy and act flexible in the short run to counter that in an appropriate way, but still focusing on price stability as the overarching goal in the long run. So exactly how to formulate such a flexible inflation target, I think it's quite tricky, but here is my first suggestion, at least for this. And it is that the central bank should contribute to the realization of the policy goals decided by the parliament. So, okay, why this formulation then? So the reason is the empirical observation that a central bank, it can either lean forward and push the economy on the knees of its full capacity, or it can lean more backwards and just stabilize inflation afterwards. So, for instance, a green government that wants to prioritize degrowth, they would probably prefer the central bank to lean more backwards. A socialist government that wants a more aggressive investment policy, they would probably prefer that the central bank leans more forwards and push the economy forwards. So therefore, this formulation, I think it should point towards the parliament's current policy goals, and that these goals should be possible to update flexible when needed. These goals should not be written into law or something. And I also think that this formulation, it creates a flexible space for the central bank to support the government's policy in cases of emergency situation, in pandemics, etc. This is also an important thing with this, to having a secondary objective. Okay, which new tools does the central bank need then? Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. New tools for the secondary objective. I think a good proposal is to allow the central bank to buy bonds directly from a politically controlled national investment authority. And this is actually a proposal from Omarova, Saul Omarova's The People's Ledger article by her. Buy bonds directly from national investment authority. So I have put it here in the picture. So here is the central bank, and it gives money to this state investment bank, and it gets bonds back. So the idea is that the central bank decides how much money to issue to and the politicians, they decide what to do with the money. Which companies that should get access to subsidies, lending, etc. So note that this means that the central bank cannot buy government bonds, and the central bank can thus not inject money into the government's operating budget. And this, I think, is important. So it can only inject money into the NIA, into the National Investment Authority for investments, not into the government's operating budget. And this forces the government to keep a sustainable operating budget, and it implies that the central bank still is strongly independent from the government, however, not fully as independent as in McMillan's proposal, because the central bank now has to cooperate and coordinate its bond purchases with the National Investment Authority's plans. So the central bank, now it also gets a new tool for contradictory monetary policy, and this is to sell the NIA's bonds on the market. So here I have illustrated it. The central bank can sell these bonds on the market for a more contradictory monetary policy. Then, to solve the third problem with McMillan's proposal, the central bank should be given a secondary objective, I think. And this is to stabilizing the interest rates. And I think this can be done through stabilizing loans to the private market against eligible collateral, which would be the government's bonds and the NIA's bonds. The interest rate for these loans would be the average market interest rate plus X%. So I think this would cut away extreme interest rate spikes. And note that the purpose of this tool, so it's not to push the average market interest rates up or down. It's just to stabilize it around its average value. So this, I would say, is a more neutral tool that just helps the private market to work more efficient. So here I have put this here into the picture also. So the central bank can thus provide stabilizing loans to everyone. So everyone will be eligible to get these loans if they have eligible collateral. That's government bonds, etc. And they then provide this collateral to the central bank, and then they can get these loans. So this solves the problem with interest rate spikes and unstable interest rates. To conclude, so I think this proposal seems to have almost all the benefits of McMillan's proposal, but it avoids all the objections against McMillan's proposal. So now an interesting question now can be, okay, can this proposal be further improved further through expanding the means, ends, and the political control of the central bank even more? Would that make my proposal even better, is the question now. And let's start with the question, okay, should we put more values into the central bank's mandate? Should it be even a broader mandate? So if the central bank's and the government's responsibilities overlap too much, I think there is a risk of unclear division of labor, where important decisions fall by the wayside. In a situation where fiscal policy would have been more efficient, there is a risk that politicians, they do nothing, and the central bank instead is forced to step in and use some suboptimal tools with some side effects instead. So this would be problems with giving them too broad mandates that overlap the thing that the government should do. And third, I mean, I would not delegate, or how should I explain this? So, I mean, there may of course exist problems of credible commitments in other policy areas as well, not only in the monetary policy area. But I mean, then we can just set up a climate authority or a countryside authority or a equality authority, etc. I mean, we should not concentrate all power just to the central bank and say, oh, give the central bank responsibility to solve the climate thing and the inequality thing and etc. etc. I mean, it would not be wise with so much power to give it to just one entity. So I think we have nothing good to earn from broadening the mandate further. And then if you look at the toolbox, so should we broadening the toolbox more? Omarova proposes a new discount window for central banks, and the idea here is to use the central bank's lending facility to pushing down interest rates in markets that we want to promote. However, I don't think technocrats at the central bank should be given this political power. In the context of a national investment authority that's politically controlled, so this lending facility, it seems just redundant. So if the central bank provides the money, if it provides money to the national investment authority, then this political controlled instance, it can just push down interest rates in all the markets we want to. So we don't need the central banks to doing this. This is unnecessary, I think. And then Omarova also proposes that the central bank should. Sorry. This is the proposal by Joseph Huber and Dyson et al. In Positive Money. This discussion about issuing new money directly to the government, directly from the central bank to the government. So, I mean, when it comes to the state's investment plans, then we already have the National Investment Authority, so nothing more can be gained when it comes to the state's investments through adding this thing. So the only reason to add this thing, it is if we want to issue new money into the government's operational budget. However, I think this seems to be a redundant and bad possibility. And this is for 3 reasons then. So first, so the government already, it has a tool to get access to newly created money for the operational budget. And this is an income tax on the steady stream of helicopter drops to the citizens. This is a tool that already exists. So second, we don't want to give the central bank power to make this choice. If new money should be issued permanently, should it then be issued to the government's budget or should it be issued to the citizens? I mean, this is a political choice and this creates space for a political game. And yeah, it can abuse its power and say, oh, now I give money to the government and now we give it to the citizens instead. If you do this and that, then I will give you more, etc. This kind of game. So that you might object here, okay, this is a problem with your proposal, Samuel, too. But I would then say that, okay, in my proposal, the central bank can choose between, it can choose between different channels, but there's only one channel for permanently increasing the money supply. And this channel is to issue money to the citizens. So, I mean, this in my proposal here, so, I mean, this is a flexible tool for issuing money at the short in the short run. So this is tools to issue money in the long run. So this is a difference. This is a permanent increase in the money supply, and this is just a temporarily. When it buys bonds, it's just a temporary increase in the money supply. So I would say that, okay, this would at least reduce these politically controversial choices that the central bank can do. It's at least more clear than in my proposal, clear rules for what the central banks should do. So yeah. Sorry, I have to find my next point. Yeah, it was okay. The third point: if helicopter drops to the citizens is used for sustainable long-term issuance of money, then I mean nothing more than inflation can be gained if we issue even more money to the government's operating budget. So then we use this helicopter drop channel as much as possible for the long-term issuance in my proposal. And then, I mean, if you then also start issuing money to the government's operating budget, then you will achieve nothing more than inflation, is the argument. And fourth, if the government needs more money for current expenditure than what is sustainable to issue permanently without inflation, and if no one wants to raise the taxes, then the government should borrow money from the private sector. Then, I mean, the purpose of borrowing money from the private sector, it is to crowd out private activities. It is to make space for a larger state without inflation. That's the purpose, or should be the purpose of government when the government borrows money. So, and then a third proposal by Omarova, it's the proposal that central bank should invest in a portfolio that corresponds to the market's supply of financial assets as a whole, and then sell and buy assets to stabilize the market. So I like the idea, but I nevertheless have 5 objections against it. But I think that yeah, I should probably be round up here, so I will not go through these objections. If you want to hear them, I can take them later. But I think I should summarize my my conclusions here. So so today we are in a situation where central banks have too much power in proportion to the high level of independency that they enjoy. And here is an example of the Swedish central bank, how I would put it into these 3 scales. Very broad toolbox, quite independent, and quite narrow tools and narrow objectives. And this is creating a legitimacy crisis for central banks. And to solve this legitimacy crisis, we can either, as in McMillan's proposal, we can narrow down the objectives and the tools so they cannot be abused. And this allows us to narrow down the level of political control, so we score better when it comes to arguments about inflation, taxes, timing consistency, and all these arguments we have gone through. So this is one possible solution. Another solution is to follow Omarova, and she starts from the argument that central banks they have a very broad toolbox today, and she also argued that, I mean, the objectives, at least in the US, the objectives are quite broad, and the inflation target actually is on par with other targets as well. So here is where, yeah, the central bank is here, and it is here today. And then, okay, independence, it has very high level of independence. So what we should do then, according to Omarova, is to adjust the level of independence. This is the shortest road. She would probably argue that this is the shortest road then. Yeah. Or we can, I mean, go further. We can do as MMT propose and have, I mean, full political control of the central bank. I mean, okay, MMT is not strictly proposing this, but many MMTers, at least they have this opinion. So, and then if you have full political control, then you can have whatever objectives you want for monetary policy and give them whatever tools you want also. So then there are no political legitimacy problems at all if you go for this MMT position. So, okay, my proposal then. So when doing political reforms, I think it's wise to start with a proposal that it takes the shortest road to achieve what we want to achieve. So what we should do then, we have to narrow down the central bank's objectives and toolbox so that they cannot be abused. So here is my proposal. So I'm trying to take the shortest road here, and this is the Swedish central bank. So this is my proposal for reform then. So we go to the left here. We narrow down it a little bit and give it more better tools and more strict rules for these tools, so it cannot be abused. And then we should also widen the target, the objectives for the central bank a little bit, just a little bit. Today, the central bank in Sweden, it already has a secondary objective, but I would put more weight on this secondary mandate. And I would say, so this is risk-free. This would not have a risk of creating problematic levels of inflation. And this is because the new tools that I propose the central bank should have, the new tools give them much better possibilities to stabilizing inflations in both the short run and in the long run. So therefore, it's no problem to put a heavier weight now on this secondary mandate. And third, then, we should preserve a strong level of central bank independence to respect the good arguments for the current paradigm, but not so strong central bank independence so that there is a risk that the society as a whole is missing out on important possibilities and become paralyzed and unable to deal with important challenges, etc., etc. So, yeah, therefore, I mean, my proposal, it implies slightly less central bank independence in some ways because it requires more coordination between monetary policy and the government. But from another perspective, it also strengthens central bank independence because the central bank cannot buy government bonds at all. And this would strengthen it, I say. It can only buy this national investment authority bond. So it's like plus minus zero when it comes to the change here in the level of independence. So then, I can conclude that this proposal is the optimal way to go. But yeah, I might of course be wrong, but I at least have arguments for it. So this was my presentation. Probably I should have made it shorter to make space for more questions, but I stopped screen sharing now.
Thank you. I don't see Lucille. I'm going to say thank you very much, Samuel. Just to make what Lucille suggested that we make postings because we're actually overtime already and the time is gone. Just to tell you, and I'm a person of possibilities, and I can see you are too, and you've just gone through quite a bit of possibilities. I can see us, we've been thinking about monetary reform all of Thursday night here with an AMRA 2024, the Greenback Restoration Act, and then thinking in the future, we can take your modeling and play with it all again, throw everything up in the air and take Samuel's thinking and then see where we come. Where does AMRA or our past proposals come in and how do we update them for the current day? So you've given us a huge amount of food for thinking and structures and tools for thinking. So it was a fantastic proposal. And I just want to add one little thought for you to go away with too. And that is, I always think I notice in the United States, we have an employment rule that we should be oriented towards full employment. And so you can have money for, when you have full employment and then you're still throwing more money into the system, that's inflation. So would there be an employment rule? And could you input that into your framework proposal sometime? So that we can keep balancing between inflation, deflation, and where are you at with an employment rule? So that's your homework assignment.
Yeah, that's an very interesting proposal. I will think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and our assignment is to take your tools and work with them.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so sorry for taking too much time, but
no, it should have been
can
90
send
minutes. You only said, I thought you only said 60, but anyhow,
yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you. And you can just send me, if you have questions or proposal, just send them in the chat or the emails or something, and I would be very happy to achieve, feedback or ideas, or we can collaborate more into this approach in the
Yes,
future.
for sure. This is the beginning. I know Lucille and AFJM, they're in love with everything Pengar, and AMI is too. But let's give the last word to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, say
just a quick question. What difference does it make? Like in Canada, the central bank is owned by the government, but in the States, it is private. How does that influence things?
So I don't know about the governance structures in the US, actually, this private or this debate. I think there is a debate if the central bank is privately owned partly or something, but you know more about it, Stephen, I think.
Yeah. Well, Samuel's played with that in terms of how early in his conversation about how to set up the central bank. But it's what you're asking, Elizabeth, is something we definitely need to look at over here. So it's a good question, and thank you for that.